Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Thank you all very much. My name is Peter Harshaw, and I'm the Director of Government Affairs for the Computing Research Association, which is an affiliate of NCWIT and involved in, obviously, the computing community. I'm here pinch-hitting as moderator for Congressman Sylvester Reyes, who is tied up on the Hill today. Today's an incredibly busy day on the Hill, apparently doing lots of intelligence work having to do with some big agency that people used to call no such agency. So one can understand why he's there and not here at the moment, but we do have a representative from the Congressman's office, Peter Ambler, who will come up here in a second and make a statement that the Congressman wanted to make when he was here. And then I'll come back up and introduce the rest of our panel today, our Congressional panel, and have a few words to say to them and then let them do a lot of talking. There's a lot of energy in the room today and a lot of desire, I think, to continue this dialogue, and we want to harness that and really work towards solutions with our statements and our questions today. So if you see me up here grimacing because it looks like you're talking a whole lot and not actually getting to your question, please narrow it down and get it in. We really want to focus on solutions to the problems, and I think we've got the panel here to at least talk about what the federal role is in that case. So for right now, I want to bring up Peter Ambler, and then I'll be back up to talk about the rest of the panel. Oh, you can do it right there. That'd be great.
First of all, I just want to apologize for Congressman Reyes not being able to make it out today, as Peter said. It's a very, very busy day in the Hill. There are series of votes, and Congressman is caught up in intelligence work. What I want to do is just sort of impart just a few of the sentiments I know he would have wanted aired here. I'll just sort of run through them. I'm not really used to speaking publicly, but so if you'll excuse me, I'm usually in the background. First of all, I just want to say that often the need for diversity is couched in the context of historical inequity in this country. That's something that's very important to the Congressman, and we believe that's a very valid concern. But it misses a more pertinent question, and one that we're all here today to discuss. And that is that we need more IT professionals, more people with STEM educations, more people able to go out there, serve in those fields, and move America forward, and help us compete, help us innovate in a new, more globalized economy. Thus, it's in our national interest, not just in the individual interest, for us to educate the underrepresented majority, as I've heard people say today, underrepresented minorities and women, to push them into the fields so that we have all of the talent that our country has to offer out there in the world competing for us, so we reach our production possibilities frontier. The Congressman believes that in order to do this, we need to start connecting STEM education, STEM careers to one sense of national service. Just to take you back in history a little bit, in 1958, Congress passed the first National Defense Education Act, which led the way, which brought the Higher Education Act and opened up great amounts of opportunity for millions of people across the country. I'm sure that many of you here are here today because of some of the programs offered under the Higher Education Act. That's the sort of fundamental American program that not only brought people out of the shadows that heretofore had not had the opportunity, but before that, but also made America a more competitive country, helped us win the Cold War, vanquish communism, and all that good stuff. Second, and in the same respect, we cannot ignore the connection between STEM education and careers and our national security. And Dr. Berry spoke about that very ably before, so I don't need to go into the details. But Congressman Reyes, serving on the Intelligence and Armed Services committees, understands very well that our national defense, our homeland security, is very much dependent on our ability to innovate, to always come up with the next big thing, to both deter our enemies, to help keep our men and women in combat safe. And that's something that's very important to Congressman. It's something that I think cannot be lost from this debate. This is the idea of national defense education. We happen to have a bill, which there's some folks on the panel here that we'd love for you to take a look at our bill, HR 4734, and maybe see if there are any programs included in it that you can fold into the great legislation that's moving through the Science Committee. But I just thought I'd get that in there. And we'd also like to thank people from the Council of Graduate Schools. There's some representatives here today. The American Association of Universities has a paper on this concept. It's something that we really need to move forward with. And I guess I'll just leave it there. I'd be happy to answer any more questions later.
All right. Thank you very much, Peter. I'd like to introduce the rest of the panel today. Also like to thank Peter for showing up and giving that statement. I think it's an important indication of how important this issue is, that we are able to get these key staffers here for the conference on such a busy day like today. Wednesdays are pretty much the busiest days in Congress nowadays. And so to have these staffers willing to give their time to talk about the subject, I think, is an indication of the importance of the topic. We're pleased to have with us Peter Rooney, who is the Deputy Chief of Staff of the House Committee on Science, chaired by Congressman Sherry Bullitt from New York. Peter Rooney serves as the Deputy Chief of Staff. He previously served as the Staff Director on the Subcommittee of Research, and before that as the Staff Director on the Subcommittee on Environment, Technology and Standards. Prior to joining the committee, he was the founding executive director of the Forum on Technology and Innovation, which is an organization established by Senators Bill Frist and Jay Rockefeller to brief House and Senate staff on emerging technology policy issues. He's got a PhD in physics from the University of California at San Diego, and we're pleased to have him on the panel. Sitting next to him is Jamie Link. Jamie works for Senator Joseph Lieberman. She's serving a one-year appointment as a legislative fellow in his office. Her background is in materials chemistry, and she staffs the senator on science and technology issues, including innovation policy, manufacturing, and defense S&T. We're also pleased to have on the panel Kathryn Clay, who is a professional staffer with the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. That's chaired by Senator Pete Domenici of New Mexico. She's responsible for a broad range of science and technology issues relating to our nation's energy future. Mostly recently, she has focused her efforts on the Protecting America's Competitive Edge Through Energy Act. This is the PACE Energy Bill. The PACE Act is based upon recommendations put forward in the National Academy's report that we've already talked about today, the Rising Above the Gathering Storm. We're pleased to have all the members, or all the staffers here on the panel today. You really can't buy this sort of access, especially especially with the latest round of lobbying reform. So we're very pleased to have them here. They're a fabulous resource. I hope that I'm just going to ask a question or two to stoke the fires, but then really throw the discussion open to the audience. Again, I really do want to focus on solutions. I'm going to ask each of the staffers to discuss some of the activities that their members of Congress or their committees are working towards relating to IT and innovation technologies. But I also want to get their perspective. Clearly, they're all working for members who are sort of on the leading edge of the curve of appreciating the importance of IT to the nation and the important role of a diverse workforce in IT. I'd like to also get their sense from their perspective what the general sense is in Congress and among the rest of the members of their committees and the members who perhaps aren't on the leading edge of their appreciation for the value of this and what work remains to be done. So with that, I think I'll throw it over to Peter, and then we'll just sort of go down the table.
Great. Thank you. Well, thanks for inviting me, and thanks for inviting really all of us. We're all colleagues. We're really working together on a joint effort to to do some things in this Congress. There's a lot of opportunity now with a tremendous national focus on competitiveness, and I think Congressman Reyes has it exactly right, that broadening participation is absolutely a competitiveness issue, and I can speak for, I think, all members of the Committee on Science. They care deeply about this, that you have to our nation's economic strength and national security really depends on increasing the number of technical professionals in the workforce. There's 30 years of economic research that link the number of scientists and engineers and information scientists working in the private economy. Really not so much, the correlation is not with faculty in universities and scientists in government laboratories. It's scientists and engineers and information professionals employed in the private economy. The link between those numbers and the potential for future productivity growth and therefore economic growth. And we clearly can't get there if we don't have broad representation of all segments of our population. So the Science Committee members, there's no, and I think this is probably true for Congress as a whole, there is no divide with respect to party or region of the country. Members feel very passionately about this. And I think also, probably also reflective of Congress, certainly this is how the committee members feel, that the key leverage point is the educational system. That the bottleneck to broader participation in technical disciplines really is education. And through really 2 years of hearings focused on education as part of developing a package of competitiveness and innovation legislation, we heard over and over again from witnesses that the high leverage point really is undergraduate education. I know there's a lot of focus on K through 12 education. That's clearly a huge national problem. But Carl Wyman, who is, I think still now a professor at the University of Colorado in Boulder, but is soon departing for British Columbia, but is a young, vigorous man who's also a Nobel Prize winner in physics, really, and passionate about education. I think he cares about science education more than anything else. And testified before our committee that you can't make progress on K through 12 education if you don't make progress at the undergraduate level, because the key bottleneck, and I think actually the National Academy's report pointed to this over and over again, the key bottleneck is math and science teachers, and that we have to do a better job as a nation at producing and training specialized math and science teachers. And that's what's going to change the educational system in this country. So for us on the Science Committee, the high leverage point really is the National Science Foundation. And within the constellation of federal agencies, it plays a very unique role in education. Number one, it has enormous power to serve as a constructive change agent on university campuses because it is the principal funder of science and engineering research on university campuses. And its role in education really has been historic. I mean, if you talk to teachers of math and science who've been around for a long time and ask them what really worked in terms of what the federal government has done in the past, and they always point back to the NSF Summer Institutes and their emphasis on content and pedagogy. And so in the committee, there's a lot of focus on what we can do to strengthen and expand what we view as very successful education programs, particularly those targeted on undergraduate education and recruiting, training, and retaining teachers of K through 12 math and science. And then the other agency that really has a lot to offer, and I think Kathryn Clay will speak more about it, but the Science Committee agrees completely with Senator Domenici and Senator Bingaman, that the Department of Energy has unique resources to bring to bear. And Congress has sent very mixed signals over the last 20 years. There's times when they've said the Department of Energy should be involved in education, and times when Congress has said absolutely not. Why are you doing that? That's crazy. Your business is to do science and build weapons. Get out of that space. And we want to send a clear message with our Senate colleagues that education is a national security and national competitiveness issue, and the Department of Energy has a lot to contribute, and they absolutely should be in the game. And with that, I think I don't know who you want to introduce next.
That's right, we'll go to JB next.
Okay, thanks. First of all, I'd like to thank ACWIT and the NSF for sponsoring this event. I think all of us on the panel were very excited to see such a focus on this issue. And I will echo what Peter says just in remarking that there is really widespread support throughout the Congress for this issue of innovation and competitiveness. I know, so my boss, Senator Lieberman, introduced a piece of legislation with Senator Ensign, the National Innovation Act, which is one of several legislative initiatives in the Senate and one of, 5 or 6 pieces of legislation in the Congress. And we have among all of these efforts, we have almost everybody in the Senate on at least one of those bills. and I think we have very close to the same widespread support in the House. So there is, I would just echo that this is not at all a divided issue. Everybody's excited to potentially have a chance to take some action on this issue. Just to give you a couple of highlights in terms of what Ensign and Lieberman focus on in their National Innovation Act, there's a lot of focus again on education and on basic research investment. And again, echoing Peter's comment, these two senators can't talk enough about how important the education pipeline is at all 3 stages, at the K through 12, undergraduate, and graduate levels. And the focus of most of the legislation I think that's in the Congress right now is really on just increasing numbers in general in STEM fields, not necessarily targeting certain currently underrepresented populations, although I think several of the programs promoted in these legislative initiatives may have the effect of doing just that. Let's see, just to, I'll throw out names of a few programs that I think might end up being vehicles just as alternative pathways to IT careers or to technical careers that may end up being attractive alternatives for groups that are currently underrepresented. The ones that are included in the Ensign-Lieberman bill are the Tech Talent Program at NSF, which sort of puts decision-making in the hands of the educators in terms of figuring out what works and increasing numbers of math and science grads. Also, the Professional Science Master's Program, which has been around for several years and provides sort of a 2-year track, which is a very interdisciplinary track. The programs vary in their subject focus, but which provides a way for students to get training in IT along with other disciplines in order to use those skills in the workforce. And then a third area is this emerging discipline of services science management engineering, and that's a discipline around which several universities are now developing curricula. And this is another very highly interdisciplinary program that looks to incorporate IT skills with various business and financial skills. And there are, I know, many industry organizations that are working with universities to develop programs in these areas. So I think there's definitely going to be a demand for workers with these skills. So there's just a few programs I'll throw out there in case anyone is interested in discussing them and the effect they may have in sort of changing the balance of the current IT workforce.
Thanks, Jamie. And Kathryn?
Well, it's very nice to be with you all today. It's a very important topic that you've all assembled here to discuss. And I think all of us on the panel have been involved with the innovation and competitiveness agenda in different forms of legislation to address it. The PACE Act that Peter referred to earlier that my boss, Senator Domenici, introduced with Senator Bingaman, Alexander, and then a number of co-sponsors. I think that our current total is about 70 co-sponsors overall. Tried to implement the recommendations of the National Academy of Science report, Rising Above the Gathering Storm, which I gather that you've heard about earlier today. The piece of that legislation, we had a package of 3 bills. The piece of that came to our committee is PACE Energy, and I'd like to say a few things about that in particular, about why Senator Domenici felt that there was a connection between competitiveness and energy. But I first thought I'd make the observation that given the task as a group of staffers to translate the recommendations of the Gathering Storm report into legislation, we realized that if we just wrote out all of the pieces that we would, I think at the time we figured that we would overlap the boundaries of 7 different committees of jurisdiction. And one of our more senior staffers in the meeting very wisely observed that your success of getting legislation passed in the Senate is inversely proportional to the number of committees of jurisdiction. So bearing that in mind, we grouped it into a package of 3 bills. And I'd like to just say a couple of things about why we carved out, in particular, the PACE energy portions. beside the obvious reason that my boss is the chair of the Energy Committee. Senator Domenici feels very strongly that new technologies are going to be required to meet the energy challenges of our nation's future. And of course, with the long time frames in developing those kind of technology breakthroughs, we're going to have to grow another generation of scientists and engineers who are interested and committed to looking at those challenges. And our hope is that the Department of Energy, by investing in K-12 education and being an agent for change in improving K-12 education, will be able to make a contribution there. Now, I would like to make just an overall observation that I'll just throw out there as an observation and leave it to the audience to comment on, and that is that while the Gathering Storm report speaks very strongly to the need for us to draw very broadly from our population and encouraging a new generation of scientists and engineers, to my read of the report, it is silent on the question of diversity. Now, I don't have an answer for that. I have some comments, but I think I'd prefer to hold those until we get some questions from the audience.
Thanks, Kathryn. I think you probably will get some questions about them from the audience. But before I throw it out to the audience, I just, on a sort of a more meta level, I wonder if the panelists can comment on, we've been talking about broad efforts to improve broadly the workforce. What's your view of the federal role in getting involved in more targeted efforts to reach these specific underrepresented populations? Throw it open to anyone on the panelists or all of the panelists.
I think it's a great question. It's very difficult. And actually, the Congress, the Science Committee and the Congress as a whole has attempted to do this over and over again. And if you look at federal law, it's literally peppered with remonstrances to, in every instance, to pay attention to underrepresented groups. And again, it's a perennial issue that members of the Science Committee of all stripes really do care about. I would have to say I haven't seen a lot of progress. In fact, if you look at the field of computer science, we had a kind of a shocking period of backsliding in terms of undergraduate enrollment and representation there. I have no idea what the explanation for that is, but it's very, very disturbing. I would say that all those items in law have not actually had any effect. And you know, none of us are experts on this topic. I'm not sure we can answer your question, but it seems to be anecdotally that there are cultural and sociological factors that are really big here. And again, a lot of that comes back to teaching. I know from my own experience, both in undergraduate and graduate studies in physics, that if you're studying physics as an undergraduate particularly, believe me, no one in that class knows what's going on. But the white guys all pretend that they know what's going on. And everybody else in the class believes them, including, I think, sometimes the professor. Now, I noticed when I was a teaching assistant that students who were, this happened over and over again, students who were the best performers in the class, they tended to be women and minorities, were depressed and wanted to drop out because they felt completely isolated, that they were the only ones who didn't understand what was going on, and it was completely shocking. And there was a huge sociological factor of, number one, not participating in this sort of bravado thing of asking questions, pretending that you know what's going on, but there was another factor that I thought was, and this is totally anecdotal, not scientific. Those students who were really the best performers and understood the material better studied completely alone, did not work in groups because they thought that was somehow unethical. And again, you know, the white guy nerds, they all got together and they shared everything, and they sort of reinforced each other. So I don't know what you do to break through that, but I do think that one of the things that Jamie mentioned that's designed to get at that is this program that Congress calls Tech Talent and the National Science Foundation calls STEP, but it really is the same program. And it's grants to universities for them to come up with propose the most creative ways to attract and retain more students in STEM fields, including information science. Now, it's not particularly targeted to underrepresented groups, but I think that we somehow did a better job on the pedagogy and nurturing, frankly, people in science, that we do a lot better with regard to underrepresented populations. And one of the things that is certainly true in the physical sciences. I can't testify to what goes on in information sciences. But one of the things that's true in physical sciences is we have a history and a culture in this nation of weeding out in favor of excellence. Now that works. We've always gotten excellence based on that. It's incredibly wasteful, though. At least half of the students that we push away have the potential to be absolutely terrific scientists and at least as good as the folks who were somehow able to grind through the system and stick it out. And one of the things that was most interesting is, I wish I could remember the name of the book. There's a wonderful researcher who's actually done a study of this and done a lot of interviews of students who, both those who left STEM fields and those who stayed through to the bitter end. And it turns out that there's no correlation in terms of their ability as determined by testing and other factors to perform. It's just a matter of the folks that stick it out have something, and the folks who stick it out don't say, oh, I had a great experience. They go, yeah, the teaching was really awful. It was just horrible. It was a bad experience, but I stuck it out. So I think that the types of things that we're trying to do, which are very broad policy, broad stroke policy items, which is all that Congress can do to signal a change in direction. My claim is that increased attention to education in technical disciplines and a focus on trying to attract and retain more students will also help, I think will differentially help underrepresented groups.
Anyone else wish to comment?
Okay. Actually, if I could just make a quick comment. Speaking from experience, we represent in El Paso, Texas, one of the largest and most capable HSIs in the whole country, the University of Texas at El Paso, which has been led for a long, long time now by Dr. Diana Natalicio, who's ending her tenure as the Vice Chair of the National Science Foundation this year. And I mean, we've had a tremendous amount of success, especially one interesting statistic is that together with New Mexico State University, which is just up the road from us, with some federal programs, some NSF grants, we've managed to produce more Hispanic engineers together than anybody else in the country. And I'm not sure that would have happened if we hadn't had, targeted grant programs from the NSF, from the federal government, bringing ETAP forward and allowing us to do that. If you just target your recruitment efforts in terms of STEM ed and STEM careers at the whole pot and don't look towards the underrepresented minority groups, you're going to run into diminishing returns at some point. Whereas if you put a larger share of your resources into recruiting minority students, well, you have whole pools of people who are ready to serve their country if they're asked to, and make a great living for their families in doing it.
So I'd like to, at this point, throw it open to general questions, although I understand we do have a special guest in the audience, Dr. Ron Sega, who is the current Undersecretary of the Air Force, is present, I believe, and has asked to ask a quick question. Is Mr. Undersecretary? I see someone making. He was here.
He's sitting right here. He's getting his picture taken.
Oh, okay.
You may have to invite him to ask a question.
Okay. All right. Oh, no, here we go. I was not misled.
This is from Bobby Schabel here that I had worked with at the University of Colorado earlier. I came here because I support what this is about. Before coming here to Washington, D.C., I was Dean of Engineering at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. And at that point, I thought it was very important to have programs of women and minority in engineering. And we emphasize that, we're recognized for that, won the President's Award for Diversity for the last 2 or 3 years. I was Dean, and then coming to the Department of Defense here in 2001 as a Director of Defense Research and Engineering, worked with Dr. Bill Berry, and the issue of workforce is very important. In fact, we recognize that critical skills for clerical people are going to be an enabler for what we do in DOD. We have areas such as network-centric or network-enabled operations for our future, which means those areas that you're emphasizing here in IT are going to be critical. And so we have, in fact, tried to do something about that. One of the outcomes of a National Security R&D subcommittee, which I had the pleasure of co-chairing with Don Kerr, highlighted some of the needs that we have not only in Department of Defense but other places in government in the areas of math, science, and engineering. And with the help of Congress, last year we did in fact submit and get approved a National Defense Education program, had many of the attributes of the National Defense Education Act in it, which would not be a big surprise, and it was focused on math, science, and engineering at the undergraduate and also the master's and PhD level. So I think that's important. I want to thank your folks that you work for in Congress for supporting that, as well as the doubling of those funds that we've requested for that program here in FY07, and it continues to basically increase as we move on forward. But I really didn't have a question for you as much as an offer of support, and thanks to those in the sponsoring agencies here for this meeting. What you're doing is terribly important. We're counting on it. We can't go outside in the sense to find clearable people. And we need those clearable skills to enable what we're doing in the future. One last comment on energy. That's important to us as well. I'm currently Undersecretary of the Air Force, and a little known fact, we recognized for it tonight, I think, we're the leading purchaser of renewable energy in the country by a lot. Purchased over 1 million megawatt hours of renewable energy last year in wind, solar, geothermal, and biomass. And so that's enabled by people that are in engineering, math, and science. And so we're going to need that in the future as well, supply side and demand and energy. So for a variety of reasons, we're all behind the need for a workforce that includes all parts of our population, and thank you for the opportunities to comment. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Clay. And I think it's very clear that any federal effort to address the education and workforce piece that doesn't have the support of the Defense Department is not doomed to succeed. Is there anyone who'd like to make general comments? Again, the focus, I don't want to keep pounding on this, is on solutions, pushing forward. So please be as concise as you can, and we'll try and get as much comment in as we can. I guess over here to the right.
I'm Carol Muller from MentorNet. I wanted to express my appreciation of the recognition that there was no mention in the Gathering Storm report of underrepresented populations. And it's been a concern that the focus on improvements and excellence in math science education have been silent on the underrepresented groups, because I think the two are clearly linked. And how can we have excellence if we don't have diversity of thought to push us to the highest levels of science? So I'm interested in the reaction to that, why it might not be there. And I guess my concern is, having worked for over 25 years in higher education, I've found, and the research backs it up, that if you don't explicitly call out people who are underrepresented in those populations, the status quo will be perpetuated. You see it in search committees when you ask people, what are your top candidates? You've got a bunch of pale males. If you say, don't you know any women or people of color who might be part of that? They go, oh, actually, the best person I can think of is somebody who fits that category. And I think we have some good research that begins to suggest why that is. But I guess my encouragement would be to call it out, but I'd be interested in any reactions you all might have about pros and cons and why that hasn't happened.
I'll make a couple of observations. There is still, although I'm familiar with the research and I'm familiar with these tensions, that if you don't call out underrepresented groups explicitly, that they do get left behind. There is still the overwhelming concept, the concept is if we just make it merit-based, if we just make it competitive, then the best of all people, regardless of background or race or gender or ethnicity, if we just make it merit-based, we will get the best by definition. And to say anything else in policy seems to detract from the idea that we want the very best and the brightest. So that's the tension. That's the tension that we're dealing with. We did try in the PACE Act and the legislation as it's written now to, we put in language saying that, that school districts that were disadvantaged according to the Department of Education classifications should be called out for special attention. We did not call out any other categories of underrepresented groups. That's the closest that we felt that politically we could go.
Anyone else on the panel?
Well, I would just say, I think the Science Committee's view is those, there is no dichotomy here, that excellence, there's no tension between excellence and diversity, and one should never feel that you have to sacrifice excellence in order to achieve diversity. That really isn't the issue, and I don't think any of us should think of it that way. All of us are capable of performing in an excellent manner, and the issue of underrepresentation in certain disciplines, and for reasons that I completely don't understand, it's the demographics are particularly skewed in the IT sector. It has nothing to do with ability to perform. It just doesn't, and so I don't think that there's really a tension there. Now, there is a historic tension sometimes between, which you might broadly call equity issues and promoting excellence, I suppose, in the sense that there are a lot of federal programs that are designed to be, remedial in nature, but that's a different set of problems, I think, and that's not what we're talking about here. And in fact, there have been programs, the ones I'm more familiar with are at the National Science Foundation, just because it's an agency that we're involved with, that conduct solicitations that require merit-based competitive review in order to fund the proposals, but also include the requirement to broaden participation. And, our experience is, our impression is that those programs actually work. And that I'm talking about programs principally that fund science, engineering, and information technology research, but also works on the education side. So I don't want to leave the impression that these two things are in opposition to one another, because they're not. We've got to achieve both at the same time.
Thank you. Paula Stern. My question is, works with the prior question and with your answer. If there is not a tension, or even if there is a tension, one way or the other, if we have a limited amount of resources that the government can expend to deal with a workforce that needs to be trained particularly in IT and computing sciences, both from a quantitative and a qualitative point of view, then doesn't it make sense to leverage those finite dollars that we have on the areas where we would get the greatest movement in the numbers? That is, go to the issue of underrepresentation of women in particular, and that is also within the STEM budgets that you focus on IT, where you've had one of the greatest needs. So I guess I'm interested in to the degree to which the bills that are being debated on the Hill are taking that finite amount of money and leveraging it most effectively, which in my case, I think, in my view, would be target the women and underrepresented and target IT. That's my question. Why don't we do that in the name of fiscal responsibility, if nothing else?
Thanks, Paula.
Should I respond? Well, I think, perhaps the word I chose, tension, doesn't capture the threshold question I was trying to get at. I think that is the question I was trying to refer to, and that is, let's say that you have a scholarship program for the best and the brightest in science and technology. A certain number of those students would have majored in science and technology fields regardless of that scholarship. And so from a purely public good, public investment ratio question, are you getting the most public good for the fewest public dollars? To be responsible with public investment, that's the kind of question you have to ask. And so, yes, I see the argument, and that's something that we struggled with in our discussions framing the legislation. Should you try to focus exclusively on groups that you know are statistically less likely to major in math and science, because then you know that those federal dollars are statistically more likely to produce benefits that would not have been realized in the absence of those federal dollars? Yes. That's exactly the threshold question. That's the tension that I see. You either put it into the legislation or you don't. You either make it a requirement in the policy or you don't. And that is the question there is not a clear agreement in the Congress on that question at the moment, and it's a philosophical one, because the other side of the argument is if you make it just based on merit, then the cream of the crop, regardless of gender, regardless of race or ethnicity, will rise to the top. That's the question. Those are the questions you have to be able to answer. That's where the research talking about whether or not you're going to be able to make inroads into the status quo, that's where you have to be focusing your attentions, because that is the heart of the question, whether you put this in the legislation or not.
Actually, I think our committee members, maybe not all of them, but most of them would really disagree with the premise that you laid out. I mean, you have to recognize that science, engineering, information science, these are truly meritocratic endeavors. And what you are proposing would cut the legs out from under what makes these disciplines successful. So I think that it's the whole history and culture of conducting science in this country, and we do science in this country better than anyone else and better than almost anything else we do, and it's because it is meritocratic. So it would be a tragedy to do anything to undermine that. The issue is, how do you broaden participation in that meritocracy? Because people have those opportunities, they will be able to compete. That's really not the issue. They have to be prepared to compete in that meritocratic environment. So I think that, again, I'm just repeating myself, but, our committee's response would be to focus on math and science education at all levels, so that our population broadly is prepared for the 21st century workplace, which is going to have much more technical content than it even does today.
I'm going to keep going until someone stops me. So let's go into the back corner there.
John Bennett from the University of Colorado at Boulder. My question relates to pipeline. The context of the question is this is a town hall related to the participation of women in computer science and IT. About 15% of the people who take the AP test in computer science are women, so something is perhaps wrong with the pipeline. And the question basically relates to existing legislation, and contemplated legislation places significant emphasis on assessment and measurement through standardized tests. And any educator will tell you if you care about something, you put it on the test. So there are states in which science is not on the test. My state was one for a while, and as a result, a middle school eliminated its entire science program because there was no science on the standardized test that middle school students took. To the best of my knowledge, only one state has engineering on their test, that's Massachusetts, and to the best of my knowledge, no state has computer science or IT on their standardized tests taken by high school seniors. So, comment?
Well, none of us serve on the education committees. I mean, and I know personally I have really no background or expertise in these issues. I can only tell you that they're hugely, hugely controversial. They're hugely controversial on members because they're hugely controversial among their constituents, and particularly among teachers. This whole idea of, pushing standardized testing to the degree that we have is not something that everybody agrees is a good idea. Beyond that, I can't really comment.
Excellent.
Let's go to the front to Jay.
I'm Jay Moore from the University of Texas at Austin. I'm not asking a question, but just I'd like to point out a possible model program for educating K-12 math and science teachers. It's called UTeach. It was developed at UT Austin, and the basic idea is people majoring in math and science can get a teaching degree while also completing a regular bachelor's degree in a math or science within 4 years, and they do teaching out in the public schools from the first semester they're on campus until they graduate. It's a new kind of program. It's been remarkably successful in increasing the number of certified math and science teachers our college turns out. And the data shows that our retention rates for minority students in that program is higher than our retention rates for those minorities elsewhere in the college. It also shows that the GPAs of the students in that program are higher. And we also now have data that shows that 5 years after graduation, 75% of these teachers are still teaching. So in public schools. So if you're interested, you can contact me, or you can just Google UTeach.
Actually, it's a fantastic program. It's something that the Science Committee is really excited about, and we'd really like to find a way to replicate that around the nation, because it absolutely does work.
To the back,
okay.
Richard.
Richard Tapia. Jay, I agree. That's a great program. I'm at Rice in Houston. Comments I want to share with you, excellence. No one doubts excellence. But we're naive in thinking that we know how to measure it, okay? Models of what excellent was 50 years ago built on different demographics, different individuals, and we continue to use it. And I think we're hurt. I'm a professor at a research university. Some idea of excellence is totally out of date as we deal with today's populations. See, as a mathematician, you can't measure excellence in one dimension. It has to be in a multiple dimensions, okay? We can't do it. And so there's no doubt, in fact, what you said is that the people we take in are not bad people. It's not that we're making that type of error. The type of error we're making are the people that we exclude, okay? That could have done very well. And that's where traditional evaluation, I fight with it every day of my life. Yesterday, before I came here, I was fighting with the evaluation in our graduate program. But that's not why I came here. What I want to do was, I wanted to talk about the statement that was made about UTAP and New Mexico. See, one of the things that we have to see is numbers is not enough. Okay? If you want to say who has the most Hispanic engineering students, of course it's University of Puerto Rico. So it's 100%. Okay? Okay. So, I mean, are you going to give them credit for recruiting Hispanics? No, okay? And, of course, women, 75% women, okay? Here's what we have, okay? When you do underrepresentation, let's say Hispanic serving institutions, they're regional. UTEP has such large populations and does beautiful with them. I love UTEP because El Paso is essentially a little part of Mexico, okay? It's right there, okay? Now, the HBCUs are different. There's selection. But Hispanic-serving institutions tend to be regional. So you do well with that indigenous population from that area. But here's what I really want to say. If we want to have leadership from underrepresented minorities in the powerful positions on the National Science Board, on the math societies, on the professional societies, we need to produce leadership from where the leaders come from. So we take, UTEP and those schools that do great jobs. University of California, Berkeley, okay, 1% African American in science and engineering, 3% Hispanic. Do they produce their share of leaders? Indeed. Look at Stanford. Look at Princeton. If we don't have representation in cross-sections from all dimensions, we're being naive. That's where the leadership comes from. So I'm not saying don't go to UTEP. But look, what can we say about underrepresentation engineering out of MIT? Out of, as I mentioned, UCLA, Caltech. That's where we're failing. Okay, so I end with what I started. Numbers are not enough. We have to have a uniform distribution.
If I could just say, I think you're sort of talking about different stops on the pipeline, right? It'd be great if more kids from El Paso could go to Stanford and MIT, but perhaps because of the low income levels there, what other factors they're not. You have something to say?
No, I'm not saying. I'm saying brag about the schools you're bragging about, but realize that while there's a success there, we have some great deficiencies in other parts, and the other parts are the ones that, at least for today, are producing our leadership.
If the panel is okay with answering a few more? Sure. Okay. Then we'll go right down here in the front.
Hi, I'm Deb Kiak-Franson from the University of Colorado at Boulder and the Colorado Coalition for Gender and IT, and I've got another pipeline question for you. Community college computing programs, even though they're also suffering declines in enrollment, still enroll and graduate greater numbers and proportions of women and underrepresented minorities than their four-year counterparts. So right in our own backyards, we have an untapped pool of students that could provide IT with the bodies and the diverse bodies that it needs. What would you do? What legislation or policies or incentives or money would you put out there to get more community college students to transfer into four-year programs?
Well, I don't want to just dominate this panel, but you're absolutely right. Community colleges, I went to school, both undergraduate and graduate, in California, and people always talk about the UC system and then also the state system, but the real strength of California's educational system is the community colleges. They've got this outstanding network of community colleges that the most interesting thing is they respond to the needs of local employers in a way that the academic community does not, and they truly serve the population of California. And I'm not saying California is better than any other state. It just happened to be the one that I was able to observe. And community colleges are tremendously important. I think they're often overlooked. There is less of a federal role in terms of community colleges, but the National Science Foundation does support math, science, education, including information sciences at community colleges. In fact, really all the grant programs that they run for education, the ones that we've talked about, strengthening and expanding, community colleges are eligible to apply. And in fact, they're a very significant class of participants. And on the Department of Education side, which I literally know nothing about except some of the rhetoric, the administration has really targeted community colleges, at least rhetorically pointed out that they have a vital role to play, that they serve populations in a way that's much more immediate than some of the other institutions of higher education. And again, something I think is very important, they really respond to the demand side of the curve that's expressed by local employers, and that's hugely important, certainly in terms of economic competitiveness.
I think we're in the back.
Ruth Farmer with Girl Scouts of the USA, and I just wanted to comment on this issue of us. We've sort of traditionally relied on the exceptional top percentage of people to fuel our innovation economy, and I think obviously, it's obvious to all of us that we cannot rely on just those few that can eke their way through and beat the system and make it. And I'm sort of channeling Dean Kamen here, but you get what you celebrate. And I would like to see some resources allocated towards celebrating those heroes we have in IT and technology and engineering and communicating that to youth as something that is worth being. And that's how we're going to reach that next tier of kids that have the potential yet aren't interested or aren't applying themselves and don't have someone pushing them or some kind of personal drive to get there.
I'll make a comment on that. Just a comment specifically about women in role models. I haven't followed literature in women in science for several years now, but I do know that there's data to support the fact that when, for example, a woman has won a Nobel Prize, there's a subsequent spike in women graduates in science and engineering fields. And so this type of thing, just having role models out there, which in a way sort of confers a halo effect on the rest of the female population or whatever minority it is, I think it's a very important thing, and I agree with you that it's important to recognize, perhaps more than we do, those types of accomplishments. But I think that the issue of role models sort of brings us to another point, which I sort of wanted to bring up, not to let the four of us off the hook. I know that we're here to talk about the federal role in encouraging these underrepresented groups, but I think that there's also a very significant role that sort of has to come from the bottom up. Like many things in education, it's difficult to legislate from the top down some of these initiatives. And all of the groups probably represented in this room, many outside groups have an opportunity to do outreach activities and to send members of your corporations or of your groups that belong to these underrepresented populations to classrooms to serve as role models and to encourage students to pursue what are very exciting careers in areas that may not seem exciting based on classroom activities. So I think the issue of role models is a very important one, and it's something we haven't really touched on.
And in terms of that, when we were writing the 21st Century National Defense Education Act, we were sitting around a table, and the sentiment came up that, a picture is really worth 1,000 words, and we wish we could legislate some sort of cool factor, behind the sciences. But it's not something we can really do, and everybody references the Sputnik moment in 1957 that galvanized the nation to pass the original National Defense Education Act and make this commitment to expanding our base into sciences, to beating the Russians. I hope it doesn't have to be that adversarial in the future, but if there's some way that we can replicate that, that'd be great. It really takes leadership, and I think that goes back to what I was saying before about the call to national service to making that association. We write letters to kids that win the science fair in El Paso, and I think if we could do more of that at a national level, that'd be great. But again, that's not something that can really come out of Congress.
I do really like the legislating cool phrase. Our panelists have been incredibly generous with their time. We've gone way over our allotment. I do hope they could answer one more question, and I think we're in the front right.
Yes.
But then we're going to have to let them go. So.
My name is Margaret Ellen Mayo Talbert, and I'm a United States citizen. I suggest that the representatives here today look at the reallocation of financial resources to focus back on education more so than in the past as education on STEM, or some might want to say science and engineering specifically. And our focus here is on women. We know we have the historically black colleges, we have the Hispanic serving institutes, we have the tribal colleges. We also have women's colleges, so that if dollars are put into those institutions in large numbers for fellowships, internships, and research assistantships in the area of focus for this town hall meeting, I believe that you can see rapid results in terms of women moving into the fields. These will be women of all colors and the like. And you have data to support this kind of move in that, think about in the 60s when the Congress said to a number of the major institutions that you need to diversify your student body. They went out and did it. I'm a product of that assertion. And so we know that it can be done. We know that it can be done because if you look at the data from the Louis Stokes Alliance for Minority Participation, a program at the National Science Foundation, you'll see it evidenced through minorities moving into science and engineering in large numbers. The same thing could happen for women. And have the national laboratories, these are the DOE laboratories, open their doors more so to women or with a focus on women, and to have a number of the private firms to do likewise. I think that the issue would be adequately addressed. Thank you.
Any comments? General agreement? All right. With that, I think we will wrap up this session. I want to thank very much our panelists for an incredibly informative discussion. And return the mic to Dr. Ashen.
Well, let me thank Peter for his excellent moderation. I think it's a great panel, and Peter, thank you very much, and everybody else on the panel, thank you very much. It's a great panel. All right, so what we want to do now, we've sort of changed our plan just a little bit because of the time. We want to take advantage of it. And there was originally going to be a short break, and then it seems like that would be a bad idea because the last short break was like 40 minutes. So I think what we want to do now is talk a little bit about what would be good recommendations or good ideas. And really open this up for you in the audience to talk about some of the suggestions, maybe talk about some of the things that you've heard, ideas that perhaps have been stimulated. Lucy Sanders and some of the people will be keeping track of some of the comments that are made, and we'll make sure that those get into the report and the blogs that come out of this. But I'll just open it up just to get the ball rolling. And if anybody wants to come up to the microphone, you can start doing that. One of the things that resonated with me very much from this panel that we just had was a comment about how, in many cases, we built systems to winnow out people, and that, in some sense, we got way too good at it. I think anyone who, like me, has been a professor has probably heard another professor say, well, there are just too many people in that class, so I'm going to come up with a test that's really hard, and we'll winnow that group down, and I'll be able to have just the best students. That's obviously not the right way to operate. It doesn't work well, but I think there's a times when that has happened and has created difficulties. So one of the things we need to look at is not how to exclude people from the process, but how to make sure we really are including all the good students, all the really excellent people that we could, especially at a time when the discipline is losing students at a significant rate. So that's my little comment from the previous panel. I'm going to open it up to some comments from people in the microphones. Over here first.
Yes, my name is Juan Gilbert, Associate Professor of Computer Science at Auburn. And this good student, excellent student comment makes me sick. Yes. I got an idea. Let's try something different. Let's change it from, because when we say that, we're talking about GPA, GRE. Add in social ability as a requirement. How many organizations did you participate in? And what's your social ability, your social aptitude? And all of a sudden now, what happens to white males? What's going to happen to the international students? See, the reason the minority students in particular, and women, don't go into the sciences, and there's studies that show this, we have a sense of giving back, a social awareness. So we go to disciplines where it's clear how we can give back and make a contribution. And even when you're raised, in particular you're a minority, we all heard say, don't forget where you come from. So when you talk about science, engineering, those things don't really cross over as disciplines that can enable you to give back. So what we do, we go to college and we get involved in a bunch of organizations, and we get an average GPA, but we did very well socially. So you see our counterparts who aren't social and very much in the books. So they get branded as good students or excellent students. And now we had comments earlier today about our graduates not being able to perform. You know one of the criteria they can't perform on? They're not social. They lack ability to interact with people outside of their culture or race. So I have a recommendation. Add to an application criteria for social ability. Then all of a sudden, you don't even need to look at race anymore. Because you know what's going to happen? It's going to exclude, just like we're excluded now, it's going to exclude a lot of international students and those white males that don't have the ability to interact with people outside their own culture. So this label of good and excellent, let's change it. That's what I say.
It's interesting you make that comment because I was visiting a university recently where they were talking about the admissions process, and one of the things they said made a dramatic change in diversity in the student body was adding in leadership, or adding in some of the social aspects into the recognition of what it is they were looking for in the admissions committee. I think that's something, I think that's really right to your point. I think you do suddenly see a different group of people when you do that. Yes, right here.
Yes, good afternoon. There were so many wonderful issues. I'm Dr. Ronnie Lowenstein, and I wear a number of hats. I'm a change agent with a nonprofit called the Education Technology Think Tank that was formed in 1997 before the term digital divide to address the conditions of the digital divide and use partnerships as a model for transforming communities. And the other hat I wear is as a consultant for the last 10 years to U.S. Congressman Major Owens, who's chair of the Education Brain Trust of the Congressional Black Caucus. And the issues of research, policy, and practice are very complex, particularly in this world that we're living with accelerated change. So there are two things I would like to say. I want to give you a piece of information. Next week, on the 25th, at 2 o'clock in the Rayburn, and I don't remember the room, the American Council, the STEM Education Caucus, in collaboration with the American Council of Education and the advisors to the STEM Education Caucus, which are a number of wonderful agencies, are having a forum looking at the issues of minority participation in higher education, and the ACE has a report. And it's not a matter in recruitment of minorities and women in the fields of STEM. The recruitment is really, we're doing fine. It's a matter that they're not completing college and they're not going into the field. And so the complex issues, are and a lot of us, have been talking about it, and we think we know what they are. But do look up ACE's report, on their website, and if you can come to the forum. So that's one issue. But one of the things that I was concerned about this program is that it's focusing on the higher end. And if we don't develop a true pipeline and we don't address K through 16 plus, we're still going to have problems. And that there was a woman in a red dress who spoke about culture, and I don't see her, but she was talking about culture. And our legislators and our science committee and so forth, there were, only 8% of budgets come from the federal government, but they do set the tone, and they do, it does have a tremendous impact. And you can't legislate a lot of change, but what you can put into legislation is the concern with public outreach and public benefit, because the changes in society, the world is flat, the liminal moment that Sherry Turkle talks about, we have all these disconnects in society. So if you get it down to the community and you have all this change and you try to do in a creative program and even a community level, but you don't have the public's understanding it, or as we saw with our wonderful panel and my colleagues from the Hill, they don't have understanding of some of the education things that were raised because they're science committee. So we have a problem, and individually and structurally, organizationally, how do we get out of this silo mentality, and how do we address the systemic, strategic issues? And so, I struggle with this. There's no one answer, and all of us need to participate to create answers, but I think we have to have a more systems approach. I think and structurally we have a problem in government where they can't even legislate when they know that there has to be public school and a pipeline, but this committee can only deal with this. This committee can't deal with that. And, you know, we heard her say that if there are cross functions, it doesn't get done. Well, that's a real problem because our world is so complex. And Boeing and Rick Stevens does presentations all over the country to talk about the systemic and the strategic. So all of this that we struggle with, the one thing we can try to do is when we get good programs in practice and when we try to impact legislation, if we can look at mass media and culture and try to do greater public outreach so that we can begin to change the minds and the hearts of our community and reach out to the hip-hop generation of youth, but also the legislators. Anyway, there's a lot. I'm sorry, I just needed to share some of the passion and support, and I thank you all for participation here.
In the back.
Hi, I'm Jim Cahoon from the University of Virginia. I want to pretend the panel is still up there and say that, you know, I think this thing about the tension and the meritocracy is just a bunch of crap. That we've had hundreds of years, you know, of slavery followed by blatant racism, sexism, and all this other stuff. How can you say what we've been doing has meritocracy? Yes, we've accomplished a lot, you know, lots of nice science things, but who knows what we would have accomplished if we had been running this thing fairly the whole time.
Over here, yeah.
Bob Meganson, University of Michigan, also occasionally adjunct faculty at a tribal college, another affiliation of which I'm very proud. You know, the problems we're struggling with here are very hard. And since this is supposed to be about solutions, we understand that solutions to these things can be very difficult to come by, which makes it very puzzling to me why it is when, on those very rare occasions when we find things that work, that they don't seem to survive, that we don't seem to really put a whole lot of effort into replicating them. I'm a mathematician. I'm not a computer scientist, but I think that the problems are very similar that we run into. And I know, particularly on the underrepresentation issue in mathematics, periodically we do actually sort of stumble into something that works. And I can give one example. It's not my point here to try to sell any one particular program, but SOCNAS, the Society for the Advancement of Chicanos and Native Americans, some years back had an undergraduate research program that seemed to do a rather startlingly remarkable job of taking students who may have had some interest in pursuing a career in mathematics and turning them into students who went on to graduate school and got PhDs. Most of the students who went into those programs actually did that. The American Mathematical Society just gave this particular program, which no longer actually exists, it's in hiatus right now, but just gave it an award for, among other things, being replicable. So since it's been replicable, that it's been declared replicable, that sort of is throwing down the gauntlet, but people aren't really picking these things up. There are some structural issues in the way that we fund things in this country that make it very difficult to be the second person that wants to do something like this and be able to get it funded. And yet we do have a few models of things that actually do seem to work and do actually seem to be addressing these very problems we're talking about. I really think as part of the solution we need to find ways to grab those few precious things that we know actually do work and get them more widely in practice.
Thank you. Over in the far corner.
Yes, I'm Jane Margolis, and I concur with your comments about grabbing some model programs and trying to make them work elsewhere. But the point that I wanted to say related to the person that was talking about systemic change, I think the problems that we're talking about, underrepresentation, is so, it's kind of like America is now living what it is not addressed for so many years. And so I feel that we saw some fumbling around where you get reports being generated about this problem, and there's some really missing people are not contributing to these. And what I feel is missing is like the Department of Civil Rights. There's a whole expertise of people that have been looking at the systemic reasons why we have underrepresentation, and they're not missing. So when we talk about the only way we're going to change things is if the right people are at the table and contributing, I think what we witnessed is that we are missing so many voices of people who have been for years looking at the issues of underrepresentation, which leads me into it is a historical moment in which America is now talking about the need for U.S. competitiveness. And so those of us who have been working on issues of diversity want to grab this moment and talk about the issues of women and underrepresentation because we feel we have a hearing. But if we silence, if we don't mobilize, like if we don't go to the Black Caucus, the political Black Caucus, or the civil rights movements, or the grassroots, or people that are really concerned about these issues, then we're not having the right people at the table. So I worry when we narrow our conversation to meet the conversation that is now happening. I just say I worry about that because then I think the real issues of segregation and all of these issues that have gotten us to the point will not be talked about as part of this problem, and therefore you won't be really getting at so much of the root of it. And I know that sounds broad, and I know it sounds general, and maybe people may think that's not a solution, and it's not a positive, concrete thing. But I guess my positive solution is, can we figure out how not to narrow the conversation so we don't drop really important issues, and we must invite the right people to the table to talk about these things, because if we leave it to a narrow framework, it's never going to get where it needs to go.
Hi, I'm Maria Montello. I work in IT at Minnesota Public Radio. There's been a lot of discussion about education and educating teachers in the math and science. And for me, as somebody who employs software developers, I see that as absolutely right where we need to place resources and energy. But I see that that the return on that investment might be years. And I need to hire somebody. I need to hire somebody next month, or I need to hire somebody next year. So I see that really one of the options, or a viable option, is to take a look at increasing H-1B visas and allowing international workers to come in and fill that gap. I think the reality is that this country has been successful because we've had the contributions of people from all over the world, and the best and the brightest come here. And I think the other thing is, if you think about diversity, a very quick and immediate way to impact diversity in your organization is to bring people from all over. And I think that if you're working with girls and women and trying to essentially spread more different kinds of seeds in your little garden, actually having your plot already ready for those to mature through having different types of people already there is one way to make sure that your plants will grow. So that would be something that I believe somebody had talked about, the PACE Act. I believe that was something that was part of it, but that's what I would encourage.
Okay. One thing I'll just comment, it relates a little bit to the statement you just made, is that the issue of gender diversity in particular is basically worldwide. So it exists in Europe, it exists in Asia, and the numbers are actually not remarkably different than they are in the United States in terms of what percentage of the engineers are women versus men in the areas of IT. In the back.
Hi, my name is Gavin Clarkson. I'm a professor at the University of Michigan in the School of Information and Native American Studies. I'm also vice chair of the American Indian Science and Engineering Society Foundation. And I wanted to just point out something. Most of you probably got a copy of the agenda, which is that has all the biographies. And you flip to the third page from the back. There's a chart that talks about the level of participation among underrepresented groups. And I just wanted to sort of, this happens a lot, and it's nobody's fault, but a lot of times Native American populations get overlooked in these groups. And I just wanted to point out, if you look at the very last row, the American Indian participation in computer science unfortunately doesn't even rise to the single-digit level. Among even associate's degrees, it's 0.8%, bachelor's degrees is 0.4%, master's degrees is 0.1%, and PhDs is 0.1%. And there are, while Native Americans are a small percentage of the population, there are still today, according to this last census, 6 million American Indians. And so if you look at that respective to the larger population demographics, Indians are demonstrably underrepresented within the computing disciplines. And there's no, if you have only 5% as many American Indians getting PhDs in computer science as you do Black and Hispanic folks, that's way lower than the representative demographics of society as a whole. And so I know that, as a faculty member who comes from an underrepresented community, I'm a member of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, I have students coming to me from all different underrepresented communities all the time for mentorship, and I'm sure for those of you who are faculty here, you have similar experiences. But I would just draw your attention to the fact that in many cases, American Indians are even invisible among minority groups. And very often, they're sometimes the groups that might need even that much more encouragement. So I would encourage you, as you start to look at sort of strategies for increasing participation, broadening participation, that you don't forget about the American Indians, because they don't live in the big cities as much as some of the other groups do, even though, sometimes they're out in the middle of absolute nowhere. And, God bless Bob for taking time to teach at tribal colleges. I know my tribe is putting together a tribal college out in the middle of nowhere. But American Indians are part of this process, and yet in some cases they often get overlooked. And just to encourage people to not forget about us.
My name is Jennifer Coughlin. I work at the Department of Energy, and I'm an Einstein Fellow, which means that I am a high school science teacher. A couple of challenges / proposed solutions. The first being that, from my take, the best thing that No Child Left Behind has done has forced us to look at the data for everyone. And no longer could we hide behind not teaching our special education students, or not teaching our girls science, or not teaching our African American science, or our Native Americans, or whatever. So we have this at the K-12 level, where if we aren't having success and having AYP within any of these populations, we can't be considered an excellent school. So my question is, I have a lot of university faculty here. Where's your No Child Left Behind? If I have met college faculty members who, with a smile in their eye and a joy in their heart, they say, I have a failure rate of 60% in my freshman physics class or my freshman CS class. If a high school graduated a failure rate of 60%, it would be on the front page of the news. And how can a university not look at itself critically and say, we are not teaching our kids? So there has to be a value system for teaching everyone, and not it's the K-12, because the bottom line is, there's problems all along the pipeline. And if you're dropping people out because they're leaving because they don't have the social skills or they don't have a variety of these other things, then that requires, I think, a long, hard look, because I'm required as a K-12 teacher to look at my data and my dropout rates. So I think that the university professorship should have to do that for their classes as well. And the second thing is, I can tell you that from the teacher perspective, it's reading first, math now, science maybe later, IT, if you really want to spark the kids' interest, I mean, they are, the gaming, I mean, they're already just fascinated with it. But if you want to get it in some sort of really concrete way, you have to think about the beauty of CS is that you can't do math without it. You can't. We heard all day long that this is just really, you can't do anything without IT anymore, period. So why is IT not driving our assessment? Why are the kids, like, who writes with pen and paper anymore? Why are we taking pen and paper tests? You know, that's not realistic. I mean, it's really not realistic for the kids anymore. However, think about what would happen if the 3rd grade reading assessment required IT skills, and the 5th grade reading assessment, and the 8th grade reading assessment, and the math assessments in the high schools, and if they actually had to exhibit IT skills in addition to reading and mathematics and science, wouldn't that really be a reflection of what happens when you do in the field? Because you have to just have IT skills. There's no training for that. Like, as a chemistry, I do research at the national labs. Nobody says, oh, you're an IT major. They just go, you have to have these skills. So that's a challenge to all of you fantastic computer science generators, is how can you design programs that can be of use to schools and assessment systems? So to use your expertise to help inform policy at the state testing levels.
Okay, it looks like we have 2 more comments. You're first.
My name is Rose Mara. I'm from the University of Missouri in the College of Education. I used to be a practicing computer scientist, so I come at this from a couple of different perspectives. And my comment is a good follow-on to the one just heard. I was pleased to hear and personally experience a lot of the attention that's being paid towards investing in our future math and science teachers at the K-12 level. I'm involved in a lot of projects at the university that are doing that. I would, however, disagree with the statement that was made a couple of times that we really don't know how to teach math and science at the K-12 level. We do know how to teach it. There's plenty of research that shows what works and what will actually help kids to develop meaningful problem-solving skills that are not divorced from what they're going to need later in their real-world workforce. The second comment, though, is that that's not going to happen with a lot of prevalence as long as teachers are having a lot of pressure to teach to standardized tests. And we need to find a way, if standardized tests aren't going to go away, and they probably aren't, we need to find a way to make these two things live together. You know, we know a lot about how to teach science using inquiry. We know a lot about how to teach math in meaningful ways, embedded in meaningful problems to all sorts of learners. But the two things really are forces against one another right now. And a suggestion I would have in terms of a long-term thing is trying to look at how we can make those two things live together so that teachers aren't torn apart. And right now they are.
And the last, thank you.
I think I better be swift because I don't want to be the one standing between the door and the people who want their food.
No, I'm the one doing it.
Oh, okay. I'm Claudia Morell. I'm with the Center for Women in Information Technology at the University of Maryland in Baltimore County. I have 2 quick solutions for you. One, I work at the international level as well as working in the state of Maryland, and I have been given the honor of being invited to attend the inaugural meeting of the Global Alliance for ICT for Development. In that role, I've had a tremendous opportunity to talk to organizations, UNESCO, European Union, others around the world about what they're doing. And I want you to know that they may not have great numbers, but they're working on it. One of the things that the European Union has done is made a formal, not a requirement, but a strong suggested request that all their advisory boards have 40% women as leaders. And I think that's a tremendous opportunity. All of our organizations should have 40% women leadership. But there were those who said, I don't know that you're going to be able to find qualified women. The in the United Kingdom, they heard that comment and immediately created a database of 300 top-level scientists and leaders so that there would be no problem finding those excellent people. Yeah, so anyway, the second point I'd like to make is the state of Maryland is also doing some tremendous, showing some tremendous leadership. I don't know if you know this or many other folks know this, but the state signed into legislation and the governor signed into law the first statewide task force on women in IT. While the rest of the country is talking about a gathering storm, Maryland is in the storm. We have a 2% unemployment rate, and we are at the cutting edge of the federal sector, and we don't have enough students for the IT demands that we have today. And yet students still think there are no jobs. They've all been outsourced. So what we've done in this is we've actually identified colleges, 5 colleges and universities from an HBCU, a community college, a comprehensive research, and independent, coming together to find solutions. We're working with the K-12 community. Montgomery County has released some recommendations for changing curriculum. By the way, Maryland's one of the first states that has technology literacy as one of the requirements for all of their students. They've integrated it into the curriculum. And the governor and the Department of Business and Economic Development, who was here today, by the way, has made it very clear that this is a priority for the state, and they will win in getting their minorities, women and minorities, into that pipeline, and that's how they will be the strongest state in IT in the nation. So there's a solution.
Okay, so we should all move to Maryland. That was this. I got that.
We also have great crabs, by the way. So.
Well, I want to thank everybody for their comments. I think this is a very interesting day. I mean, we started out talking about some of the issues and things that corporations are doing and can do or might do. We've talked about some of the issues in education, at the university level, at the K through 12 level. We've had good discussions about the role of government and the role that can play. And I think also good interchange on a lot of other issues. And I thought that was great to hear. Now, I was never really elected mayor, really. So I'm the unelected mayor. So I guess I can't really be impeached. But I can get off the stage. And so I'm going to do that, and I'm going to pass it on to Lucy. Thank you very much.
So just a few comments in terms of a wrap-up. I think that all of the comments today just showed that we actually have to have town halls. Town hall, by definition, is full of many, many, many different kinds of dialogues. You hear passion, you can hear some anger, you can hear some confusion, you can hear some constructive solutions, you can hear all kinds of remarks and comments, and that's what's so beautiful about a town hall. You know, it's a tapestry of information, and we're going to take all of this, and this is just the beginning of this kind of a dialogue. We need to keep pushing on this. We're going to create a podcast. We're going to put it up on the internet, so all of your great thoughts will be out there for everybody forever in cyberspace. And we're going to keep pushing the conversation because this is just the beginning. And, you know, in many ways, sometimes it gets a little messy or, you know, some people are going off in all different directions. But the real trick is going to be moving to action and getting things done. And I want to applaud all of you for sticking through all of this. And after Jan makes her remarks, we will reward you with a reception, which is very cool.
Well, I don't have very long remarks to make, except that I hope you do all stay for the reception. As with many conferences, a lot of the really interesting activity happens in the breaks, and we have a long break here and a really nice reception. So I ask you all to stay and continue these conversations. Thank you.
And I have one more thing, too, I should say, or I would be remiss. It is not often that an industry executive like Rick steps out for a whole day and spends his time with us. And I just want to thank him one more time for being here and listening and moderating. We have had to change, probably, in case you couldn't tell, all the exercise we were getting, jumping up and down all the time, a billion different facts along the way because of the congressional staffers' time and what was going on in the Hill. And so, Rick, you are very special, and thank you very much.